Rachel, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And from the confines of your car, too. I've never had somebody take a call from the car. So, there's a first for everything.
Yes, very scenic here. We love that. So, just bouncing between life and meetings and kid pickup and coaching and business ownership. So, you know the drill.
Yes. Talk to me about coaching. What do you do?
I coach Orange Theory, which I actually started, I say, like as a passion project. So, you know this from opening a cash pay kind of clinic. You open a cash pay clinic and you don't have any patients because that's, not in an insurance based system. I feel like you get a lot of referrals and things kind of flow a little bit, but cash pay, you have to go find people and get people to really trust you and, establish a real relationship with them. And so when I opened my clinic here, I had actually moved here because of a non-compete in Georgia that I was being threatened to be sued for. And moved here and was kind of like, okay, I'm not going back to the insurance model. And didn't know anyone, didn't have any relationships with the doctors. And so I was kind of like, well, why don't I coach from Siri? That would be kind of fun because I did it as a member for a while and started coaching. And then now I'm 4 years later. And the problem is I'm just like so attached to the members that have been in my class for 4 years that I like can't give it up. So I coach 2 classes a week. But it's fun. It gives me a way to see, like, especially if they become patients, watch them perform outside the clinic. Like, okay, you discharged from PT, but now I get to push you in dry try or I get to push you, on the weight floor, things like that. So it's been a really cool project that I probably don't have time for anymore, but I still have been just refusing to give it up.
Oh my gosh. I feel like as a patient, I would feel so much pressure if I graduated PT, but then you were my Orange Theory coach. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I better be perfect today or she's going to tell on me.
Well, sometimes I'll see them like they're doing an exercise and I can see them like wincing and then I'll like kind of like give them a look and then they'll start doing like their rehab exercises and I'm like, yes, good, good. So it gives me a way to like keep an eye on them, but also again, it's fun because I feel like you don't get to see that side of it in rehab world a lot where it's kind of like, oh, I'm better. And then you're kind of like, bye, have a nice life. So I feel like I get to see, the after portion, which is really enjoyable. And I just have like refused to cut it off my plate right now.
So has the Orange Theory grouping of people been a good referral base for you since you started?
Yeah, it's not even really just that. Like I do obviously, every now and then someone will come up to me after class and be like, "Hey, my knee's bothering me, can I get in with you or whatever?" And we can work that out. That's not a big deal. But it's interesting because truthfully, most of the people that I've gotten from them are like, "Oh, my daughter cheers on this team and her teammate's injured. Could she come see you?" Like they in like the kindest way possible are just the best word of mouth. They're like, "Oh, my coach at Orange Theory is a physical therapist. You should work with her." And so again, it's those relationships that again, I just feel like I know these people so deeply now. We've worked together for almost 4 years, same time every single week, week after week, and they in an amazing way have just been like my biggest hype crew moving here, which I just desperately needed not having any relationships. If I had opened my own clinic where I moved from, I would have had a lot of people that I already knew and a lot of doctors who already wanted to send to me anyways. And we just didn't have that here. And so it was such a easy and good and fun way to kind of like, you're marketing yourself by being like, hey, I do this full time, but also I'm here to coach because I enjoy that. And it just turned into like, now I treat a lot of those people or their families or their friends. And it just was such an organic way to like grow a clinic. And I'm forever thankful for that.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I also think optics go a long way when people in the community see you doing what you've been preaching, practicing what you preach. That's
Mhm.
good. They want to go see a provider that is also doing the things that they want to get back to. So I think that's great. How long have you been operating your own clinic? You said 4 years? More than that?
Yeah, so it'll be 4 years in September, and that's been a variety of, like, renting space in a gym versus now having my own commercial, space, and renting out to other providers who also need space, which has been really fun. So it's kind of been 4
Nice.
years of bouncing back and forth between how much, I'm, quote, "owning" per se, but, this past year and a half, I've been in my own space and now have enough space to rent to other PTs who are kind of in a similar situation, but don't necessarily wanna go open their own commercial real estate, which is really nice. So it gives them an opportunity to kind of break out of the traditional model without having to take on all the overhead.
How long have you been into and treating pelvic floor?
Since I had my first, which was now almost 9 years ago, I'm sure you can kind of resonate with this, like, not really realizing how much of a problem pelvic floor issues are until having a kid and then being like, "Whoa, what is all of this?" And I remember being so frustrated
Right.
because I had my PT degree and thinking like, if I'm having muscle pain or if I'm having symptoms associated with muscles, I should be the person who knows those things, right? Like that is my expertise. And so to have a baby and try to get back to activity that I love and enjoy and care about and realize that there's these symptoms in the way that I've like never learned about or addressed or understood, it kind of became this like, well, who am I supposed to go to, right? Shouldn't that be us as physical therapists? Um, and at the time, I mean, again, 9 years ago, pelvic floor PT wasn't a crazy popular thing. Like it was kind of seen as this, like,
Right.
you only do that if you're really wanting to work with like really older adults and like, having a lot of leakage. There's no other symptoms associated with it. And so that kind of opened my eyes of like, I don't have to be, 75 and leaking on myself to have pelvic floor dysfunction. So ended up going to see a pelvic PT, of course, because I was having symptoms. She was a good friend of mine. And she fixed them in like no time. And I was like, this is crazy that I didn't know about this part of my own
Mm.
body as a physical therapist. And now it's what I do like full time.
Okay, so is that the majority of your caseload?
I would say the majority of my caseload is a mix of pelvic and ortho, which is kind of where I fall. And I say pelvic and ortho, meaning people come in for quote orthopedic issues and don't realize that their pelvic floor is potentially involved. And then as we get to talking, it kind of comes up of like, oh, wait, like that chronic low back pain that wasn't resolved with traditional physical therapy could be some pelvic floor dysfunction. And so people come in with other, issues, having tried other PT before. I say all the time, like a lot of the clients that walk into my office, for better or for worse, are people who have been through physical therapy before and didn't see the results that they wanted. And again, I have this incredible hype crew of people who's like, okay, you should try this. Like you should try to go see Rachel. So I feel like some of the cases that I work with are fairly complex, but it's a lot of athletes, people who want to run or play golf or play tennis recreationally or elite and want to understand their bodies a little bit better. And so it feels orthopedic, but it's pelvic health too. So it's been kind of a mix of both of those, which has been really great.
Yes, and I think if you are treating in that way where it's a nice blend between orthopedic and pelvic health, that's kind of the best place to be because rarely do you see a pelvic floor issue in isolation. At least I don't think I've seen too much of that, right? Like if it is pelvic floor, it's also we need to work hip, we need to work back, we need to do core. And so it's orthopedic anyways. So yeah, I have a pelvic floor PT and I would say she would agree and say the same thing.
Yeah, I wish that we taught it that way in PT school. Like, even if you don't want to specialize, in pelvic health, we still should be learning about it so that, like, I can pick up on it and know if I should refer to someone who does specialize. If someone comes in complaining of low back pain, I need to know what other red flags are as to where that low back pain is coming from.
Yes. Agreed. And I'm glad that you brought that up because earlier this afternoon, I posted a story and I said, "Hey, I'm having a pelvic floor PT. Come on the podcast, send in your questions." And even though it's only been a couple hours, we've had a lot of write ins. But right off the bat, because you mentioned, I wish we learned more about this in PT school, I want to answer the first question that came in. They said, what kind of continuing education is required after graduating PT school? Now, that's pretty generic. She didn't say pelvic floor PT education, but let's go pelvic floor specific.
Yeah, I did mine through Herman and Wallace, just pelvic floor level one, I think is such a good place to start. Like that just gives you the background on what the pelvic floor is, how it functions, how it works. It teaches you the internal exam because I do think that's an important component. I don't do internal exams all the time. I do maybe two or so a week, but it's a tool that you need to have in your toolbox, as someone who is going to treat that just in case you need it. That said, Herman and Wallace has a ton of options and they to me are just wonderful, but I will be teaching actually a course in Atlanta in August that is more geared for pelvic health for the athlete. So if you work with a very active population and want to understand how the pelvic floor integrates into like performance, so like running and jumping and twisting and all of those types of things, that is a course where you don't have to have any pelvic floor background, or you don't have to have the understanding to do internal work. We won't be doing internal work. Everything's external for that course. So if you want to know more about like how the pelvic floor affects performance, I'll be teaching that in Atlanta the 8th and the 9th.
Okay. And who are you teaching that through?
That's me.
Nice. Oh, okay. Maybe I'll go.
Yeah, come on, it'll be fun. It's again for me. I've gotten a lot of people who have signed up who have kind of messaged me and been like, I want to do things like host a pelvic floor workshop at my local run club or whatever. And what are some things I could do? What are some external checks that I could provide that don't feel like, oh, I've got to get you on a table under a sheet and do an internal exam to tell you if you have pelvic floor dysfunction. So it's meant to be things that you can integrate into performance because my goal is to really try to get this to be something that we talk about well before pregnancy postpartum, because pregnancy postpartum just exposes it. But it's there way before that. And if we could fix it in high school locker rooms, college locker rooms, start having the discussion as strength and conditioning coaches, I really think we could like move the needle in such a positive way. So that's the goal of this course.
Okay. Perfect. I love it. This next question you sort of already answered, but I think it would do well to touch on it just a little bit more. Do you think pelvic floor therapy without an internal assessment can be just as effective?
I think it depends on the situation. I do a lot of actually telehealth for this because there's a lot of people who reach out who just, again, feel like maybe I went to a pelvic PT or I went to a different PT, didn't get the results I wanted. I would just love to know your thoughts. So there are absolutely ways that we can chat about treating things without an internal exam. And the reality is, again, as PTs, we have to understand not everyone's going to be comfortable with an internal exam. It's not my job to force someone to undergo an internal exam. My job is to take the information that I'm given, have a relationship with the patient that, opens a line of communication regarding honest symptom discussions and to use that information that I have. So by no means is an internal exam required. Now, can it be a helpful tool in a lot of cases? Sure, but it's not required to make progress. And again, like that course in August, we won't do internal. We'll do actual external exams because you can assess the pelvic floor externally and get an idea of what's happening. Is it as accurate as an internal? No, but it still gives you a lot of feedback and gives you room for people who are maybe a little more hesitant for an internal exam for obvious reasons.
Okay. Yeah, I think that was a great answer. Okay. Look at how many I got though, for real. I just want to show you. Can you see my screen?
Yay, though.
I I know. I
Yay.
only posted it like an hour and a half ago. So we probably won't get through all of them, but I think obviously the podcast exists for the audience, but it also exists for me. I like to learn and connect with people. But these are common questions that I get either in my DMs or just in general when it comes to pelvic floor PT, people in the
Mhm.
clinic. So this one's interesting. How can we continuously cue pelvic floor engaging in exercise?
I think the key in that answer is that we shouldn't be. So the goal of the pelvic floor
Yep.
is to be very like reflexive and responsive. It's meant to be fairly subconscious. So, when someone comes to see me for the first time, yes, we may cue the pelvic floor specifically. I may have them do, very slow, focused, intentional movement and breath work. But my goal is that when we discharge you and you're done, you don't have to think about it at all. Like, if anything, like once a month, maybe do like a pelvic floor check-in workout specific. But the reality is the pelvic floor is active in a lunge, in a squat, in a deadlift, in running. And so if it's working well, the goal should be I don't have to cue it at all. But like, for example, I may have someone, for example, with the kettlebell swing. Let's do 5 really slow, focused, intentional kettlebell swings where we set it down, we inhale, we lengthen, and then we exhale, shorten, engage as we do the movement. We do 5 of them very separate, intentional, and then we string together 5 or 10 where I don't want you to think about it at all. I just want you to produce power. So the goal should be that we're not thinking about it all the time. It's just that rehab may start there.
What do you think the cause is in your brain for why postpartum we have a harder time having those things just be reflexive?
Well, I think that goes back to our discussion earlier of if we would teach people about this before pregnancy and postpartum, it would be a lot easier to connect to postpartum, right? So, like, I always go back to the ACL repair because it's an
Yeah.
easy kind of connection for people. When you have an ACL repair, you know what it feels like to bend and straighten your knee. You know what it feels like to squeeze your quad, or you have another quad you can look at and see it squeeze and activate. With the pelvic floor, when no one has taught you what a contraction is, what a reverse Kegel is, what it means to lengthen, what it means to actually use it in function, and you've never mindfully connected to it, and then it goes through, like you said, the trauma of birth. And even if everything goes perfectly, it's still a lot of, trauma to the muscles. And so now we're trying
Yeah.
to reconnect to a muscle that we have never even connected to before the trauma of labor and delivery. So this is where, like, in the book that comes out in October, we've talked about, like, I would love for, like, teams in high school, college, like when you're playing, legitimate level sports where we're having these women go out and do these really big tasks that require a lot of muscle and a lot of coordination. Why don't we do an in service every year and teach them like just what it means to connect? Because then they could do it in the weight room and then they can do it on the field without having to think about it so much, right? Or that tailbone pain that I have when I change directions now goes away because I'm actually lengthening when I make that turn and that pivot. And so I think, to answer your question, the fix, or at least part of the fix, would be to teach people about it before it becomes problematic. Like when we wait for it to become a problem, then it's very hard to connect to.
Yeah, you have that much more ground to cover.
Totally.
Okay, good follow-up question then. What are best tips to prepare pelvic floor for birth of a child?
I think the classic answer here is going to be to focus on the length of the pelvic floor. So, like a strong pelvic floor does not push your baby out. The pelvic floor's job is to hold everything up. And so, as baby gets heavier and heavier, I tell patients to think about like a trampoline. And at first, baby's a little poppy seed just sitting on the trampoline, no big deal. But over the course of 10 months, baby gets bigger and heavier. And so the pelvic floor is already doing a lot of work to hold the baby up and in and hold up your organs. And your posture changes, and it's a postural muscle. And so the pelvic floor is doing enough during pregnancy. And so by the time that you get to like labor delivery, a lot of times it's exhausted and does not understand how to lengthen because it's not something you've intentionally focused on. So I know, like when I had the birth apps where it tells you, your baby's the size of a tennis racket or something, it talks a lot about like Kegels, right? So like Kegels at every red light, do your Kegels, do your Kegels. And a lot of women don't need Kegels. They need to learn how to move the muscles out of the way because the reality is your uterus will push baby out one way or another. It's either going to have the help of the muscles to get out of the way, or the muscles are going to stay really rigid and, stuck in that position, and the uterus will eventually have to override them to get baby out. But your uterus is going to do the pushing. And I think, we don't help ourselves in the hospital when we say like bear down, hold your breath and push, and we don't teach people how to lengthen. So this is a dream world, but in a dream world, we'd have PT on the labor delivery floor. Like, okay, maybe you didn't do PT up until this point, but I'm here now. Can I teach you how to lengthen before we start this pushing process? I would love for that to be a reality.
I would too. Yeah. Funny you bring that up. I have a friend here in town who started doing just right after birth, going in and doing a consult for every new mom at this hospital in Cleveland, Tennessee. And her dream would be that, that exists everywhere all around the world and every, labor and delivery wing, which would be so cool. Like, think if I would have loved that. And me as a PT with some knowledge of pelvic floor, I'm still like, yeah, let me know what to expect because so many people don't know. Let's take a brief moment to pause this episode so I can talk to you about Jane. Jane is my clinical management software that I have been using for the past 2 years. Before I started using Jane, I was a one woman show trying to run the ship with horrible systems. I was taking payments with the Square app. I was scheduling people via Google Calendar. I was documenting in one place, and then I was texting people to remind them of their appointments. Everything was scrambled, including my head. And then when I got Jane, it was like everything fell into place. I started to feel more like a legitimate business. Patients were getting automated reminders for their appointments. They were filling out their paperwork online before their initial evaluation. They were saving their card on file. They were uploading medical documents as needed. And then on my side of things, I am now able to use AI Scribe for documentation to give me more time with my patients. I can run reports every month to see how the business is doing. Using Jane is like having a coworker with you 24/7. And lucky for you guys, if you are interested in Jane and want to try it out for 2 months, you can do that for free using my code RonniePT2MO. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I think it's growing, like, there's a growing demand for it, which is important, like, more and more women are advocating, like, "This we need help on this. It makes no sense that we get no support." And I think all the time, like, I worked in the hospital kind of like PRN, after graduation. We had PTs in the ICU who were doing, like, passive range of motion for unconscious patients so they don't lose range of motion, and that's incredibly important. But the idea that we would have, me go into a room and move your elbow and move your wrist so that you don't lose it when you gain consciousness again, and we don't have a PT on the labor delivery floor is wild. It just doesn't actually make sense.
That is wild.
Um, I just think it's one of those we've always done things this way situations, and a lot of the feedback that we get, because I've tried to push for it in Charlotte because we don't have pelvic PT in the hospital in Charlotte. I got up to a like pretty high
Mhm.
level like meeting, and then it turned into this whole logistics of how do we implement it. I put all that out there, and the feedback I kept getting was like, well, we don't have evidence that it could be helpful, right? Okay,
What?
we don't have evidence to the contrary, right? So, like, where's your paper showing me that no PT is beneficial? Because if that's the argument we're gonna make, then I need you to have that same energy back when you're saying, "Hey, this doesn't make sense for us." But the same way that you bill NeuroRead or Therex or whatever on any other floor, you could bill that on the labor delivery floor.
Yeah, 100%. And a good statistic would be to pull, okay, how many women at their 6-week follow-up postpartum are then being referred to pelvic floor PT because they're having all of these symptoms? Like that right there is a pretty good argument point, I think.
Yeah, and the first 6 weeks, just like any other musculoskeletal situation, are so critical. There's so much change happening in those 6 weeks. And so when we don't provide women PT in the hospital, we don't refer them to a PT until the 6-week postpartum mark, we've missed such a, like, really critical, crucial window of healing that could set women up for so much success. And a lot of women, the reality is for, like, the world we live in, don't have access to a pelvic PT at 6 weeks anyways. They can't afford it. It's so expensive. They, can't get off work because we don't have maternity leave here. Like, there are so many barriers after you leave the hospital that we need to decrease the barriers when you're in the hospital, right? I'm already here. Send a PT into my room. Let me at least learn a little bit. And maybe they can be people who are kind of like, hey, just FYI, you should check in with someone, because there's still so many women who leave and don't even know that pelvic PT exists or that they need it or that it's important. No one's taught them that.
Okay, next question. A tight muscle doesn't always mean a strong muscle. Is this the case with pelvic floor?
Correct. I go back to the trampoline for this one because it's the easiest visual. So if I am jumping on trampoline and the springs are too tight, that trampoline is not a fun trampoline to bounce on, right? So the pelvic floor needs to have enough length to give and enough strength to recoil so that when I go run and my foot hits the ground, it lengthens. And then when I'm in that flight phase, it recoils and it pulls back up, right? So in the case of a tight pelvic floor, I jump on that trampoline, the springs are overactive, and now I get that really jarring sensation where that's where we see like hip pain, back pain, groin strains, hamstring strains, things that look like quote unquote traditional orthopedic issues that are actually an issue of the pelvic floor is not absorbing force. And when it doesn't absorb force, something else has to. The other way to look at it is if I like walk around with my fist like clenched all day long and I squeeze and I squeeze and I squeeze and I squeeze, I come home and someone finally like pries my fingers open and relaxes them, and then you gave me a grip strength test, it would not be good, right? I don't have anything left. I've been squeezing all day. And so your pelvic floor can do that without you realizing it, in the same way that we clench our jaw, we hike our shoulders up, and someone has to say, like, get your shoulders out of your ears, like, breathe and like relax your jaw. Your pelvic floor does that too, but you can't see it. And so a lot of times when you have an overactive pelvic floor, step one, yeah, we need to teach length. But step two, now we have to teach strength because now we have the full range of motion. and now there's weakness that you didn't notice before because you didn't have that length available to you.
That's so well said. And it perfectly tees us up for the next question. Things that musculoskeletal PTs should include in their assessments for low back slash pelvis. And I'm assuming this person, man or woman, is asking from the context of just like general orthopedic,
Totally.
maybe what things we should screen for if we don't know much.
Agree. One, I love that this question is asked at all because I look back on my career as a quote, just ortho PT and think about how many people I really honestly failed because I didn't know anything about the pelvic floor. And so for me, there's kind of two big things that stand out in my mind. Number one, there is a tool. It's not validated. Like I know the internet freaks out about this stuff, but it's not a validated tool, but it's with our book that comes out in October. It's called the Flora Athlete Questionnaire. And it's something that I created for this same exact question of coaches and providers and practitioners who don't have pelvic floor experience. How can we catch it a little bit earlier without feeling like we have to ask a bunch of sensitive questions that maybe aren't our scope, anyways? So, the Flora Athlete Questionnaire is something that it scores. So like, 0 to 5 is kind of like mild symptoms, et cetera. It kind of tells you what to do and when to refer. But it asks a bunch of questions about the pelvic floor that your client may not even realize are pelvic floor related, right? So it'll ask about like, do you have pressure and heaviness? Do you have an increased urgency? Like it's very performance driven. So even very high level athletes can answer it and you can get a good idea without even having to ask a question, is there pelvic floor dysfunction here? So it's something that my, again, hope is that we start integrating into annual physicals. When you go in for your annual physical, can we ask questions about the pelvic floor? And even if I'm not a specialist, I can look at your score and kind of be like, you got a lot of like pelvic floor questions here that are like flagging. Maybe it's something I need to consider as your orthopedic PT, or I should refer out if I don't see change that I would expect. So that's step one, I think, is integrating more subjective questionnaires that if you don't want to be a pelvic PT, you have some kind of like intake questionnaire that can kind of screen some of that out for you. Number two would be I think that as ortho PTs, we should learn the external exam. Like we check your, knee if it can bend and straighten. We check your elbow, we check your hip. Like it doesn't weird us out to talk about the adductors or the glutes. And for some reason, pelvic floor, we suddenly like, oop, brain off. So there is a way to do an external
Hmm.
exam. Now, is it as accurate as an internal? No, but there is a way for you to palpate externally. Do I feel a Kegel? Do I feel a reverse Kegel? And if not, I could either refer out or I could learn enough of the basics to where we could start to teach that in orthopedic settings. But I think avoiding it does patients so much more harm than good just because we're not super comfortable with it. But as PTs, again, we are comfortable with inner thigh. I'm comfortable working on your pectineus way up in there, but the second we shift to pelvic floor, it's
Right.
like, "Ooh, don't talk about it." Like, we are the people who should be talking
Right.
about it, right? No one else is gonna check it. And so I think getting comfortable with an external exam, even if you don't want to do internal and you don't want to be a pelvic floor PT, is important.
Cool. So then, I guess, on the topic of having a regular orthopedic exam, doing the external palpation without doing an internal exam, one question that literally just came in, this is like a live question feed. I love it. It is saying how to identify whether it's pelvic floor tightness or weakness, parentheses, males and females. And you don't have to give like a super long winded answer, but maybe just rattle off like a couple of things that you might notice that would lead you to the conclusion it's tight versus weak
I
or
think
both.
the issue is that there's so much overlap here that it's gonna be tough to separate the 2,
Mhm.
because like we said, tightness can also mean weakness. It doesn't have to be overactive or underactive. A lot of times, both of those can kinda coexist in some way, and that's where, again, I think an external exam and a combination of subjective reporting gives us information. So symptoms like urgency, frequency, I have to go to the bathroom really bad, I have to go to the bathroom way more frequently than I should. As soon as I start a workout, realize, oops, need to go to the bathroom, even though I just went to the bathroom before the workout started. Tailbone pain, hamstring pain, groin pain, back pain, all of those things can be pelvic floor overactivity or underactivity. And the only true way for us to be like, okay, this is what it is to check the muscles, right? And see, like, what are we experiencing? Can we actually move? If not, how can we fix that? And that's where, again, I think the external exam for the pelvic floor is something that the orthopedic PT should get comfortable with.
Yeah. And that is something that you're going to be going over in your class in August.
Yes, totally. And again, it's not something that like I'm not trying to make traditional ortho PTs pelvic PTs because I understand not everyone wants to do pelvic PT. But it is our job, it's our job to realize, hey, that's presenting more like a kidney stone than musculoskeletal low back pain. It's also my job to say, hey, that's presenting more like a pelvic floor issue than a musculoskeletal low back issue. And so therefore, my job is to know that and refer you to the best possible person, which if there is prevalent pelvic floor dysfunction based on my external exam and subjective questionnaire, I should send you to a pelvic PT. That's the right thing to do for you and your client.
Do you also see male clients or mostly just female?
Mostly see female, but I think it's just because males don't know how prevalent this is in them. So like that, window of opportunity for education is huge. Honestly, the most that I see for men is a lot of golfers. So golfers are it's a rotational sport, right? And they have a lot of back pain. Okay, well if I can't lengthen my pelvic floor, I don't have hip internal rotation. I have to get it from somewhere. And so a lot of them end up in my clinic because, again, they've kind of tried the traditional stuff. And then they come see me and we integrate pelvic floor and they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was such an issue. So I work with men, but it's an education thing of them not realizing that they need pelvic PT. And it's also a lot of bikers. I see a lot of like nerve issues in bikers because of the compression on the pelvic floor. And it's something that's so easy to fix if we do it the right way.
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you said bikers because I'm not lying. This question says, you should ask her about pudendal nerves in cyclists. My older cyclists deal with this.
Yep, pudendal nerves or pudendal neuralgia, so nerve pain of the, pudendal nerve. So that is an area that, obviously when you sit on a bike, there's compression to the pelvic floor for a long extended period of time. The pelvic floor muscles will tend to want to squeeze and kind of spasm and protect that nerve. And so a lot of times I'll get a case of like complex pudendal neuralgia that's been misdiagnosed as like a prostate issue or, again, a hip pain issue and not an actual pelvic floor issue. And the second they come in and say that they bike, that's like one of the big, like that's going to be one of the first things that we check. And in a lot of cases, the second that we teach them how to lengthen, it goes away.
Okay. We've talked a lot about lengthening, and I can think of some of the cues that we use in the clinic. But for people listening who are like, what do you mean by lengthen my pelvic floor? How would you coach them through that?
For women, the easiest visual, like if I'm doing telehealth where I'm not working directly with them, is like you're gently pushing out a tampon. So I see a lot on the internet about like a strong pelvic floor. I saw a video of like a girl like pushing her cup out at the gym and being like, look how strong my pelvic floor is. That's actually a problem. So it shouldn't be, to me, even the word push can be problematic in some ways because for a lot of athletes, especially, they kind of hold their breath, they bear down, and they force the pelvic floor open. And so I tell clients it should be
Right.
like if I take a tube of toothpaste and I turn it upside down to where the cap's at the bottom, my goal here is to get the cap off. And I can do that by slowly unscrewing the cap. I can also do that by squeezing the tube of toothpaste so hard that the cap shoots off, right? And those are very different mechanisms that achieve the same goal. I want you to be able to slowly unscrew and lengthen that cap. And so that opening, so open instead of push, can I open and lengthen? Breathing into the butthole is a really easy one for most people. Like when you take a deep breath in, I want you to feel that breath move straight into your butthole. And a lot of people can connect to that really quickly, like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But a lot of times I'll just have people sit on their hand. Sit on your hand, put your hand between your sits bones. Can you open to where you feel a gentle press down into your hand? And if you can do that, then more than likely that's a reverse Kegel. The same way we'd stretch your hamstring, the same way we would stretch your glutes, that is a pelvic floor stretch. And so sitting and getting that feeling and that sensation can be incredibly helpful. But I really, instead of push, I like open, breathe into the butthole. And then again, once you get the hang of it, lengthening is an easy, hey, lengthen, lengthen, lengthen is good to integrate into like the gym.
Okay. And then if someone is listening right now and they're sitting on their hand and they're trying to complete what you've described, what are some compensatory things that they should watch out for?
We see a lot of glute clenching. So a lot of like, I'm going to like squeeze my butt cheeks. I should not really see from the outside any movement. Kegel or reverse Kegel, everything is internal. So if we're going to isolate it and really teach that control, I shouldn't even be able to tell that you're doing anything externally. So no glute clenches, no thigh squeezes, no breath holding. All of those things are kind of three big ones that really pop up. And then again, that gripping technique where you push so hard that it forces it down versus actually being able to control the opening. So, like when you go to the bathroom, let's say you're constipated and you strain, right? You push so freaking hard that that eventually forces its way out. If I can move the muscles out of the way by like opening them voluntarily, then usually I'm going to get better results from that. So it's teaching like, yes, the goal is to open and lengthen the pelvic floor, but you can do that by creating so much pressure that it forces it open. Or I could teach your muscles to have enough control that they could do it themselves.
Okay. I like it. I have 2 more questions. One came in that I really like because this is me. I have this pain, and I know a lot of other people do too, so we'll start with it. Good treatment options for symphysis pain during and after pregnancy. And for those listening, that is pubic symphysis.
Yeah, I think that this one is it gets tricky because it's an integration of the pelvic floor into a lot of things. So one of the ways that I train and coach and teach is a four-phase kind of approach. So phase one is control. So do I have the ability to control my pelvic floor? Can I move it up? Can I move it down? Can I do that in a way that's controlled so that it's not just on off, but more of like a dimmer light? Okay. So that's phase one. I can do that, check that box. Cool. Moving on. Phase two, functional stuff. So like now can I take that into my sit to stand and my lunge, and can I lengthen when I'm in a hinged position the same way my glutes and hamstrings lengthen? So can I take those movements that I just worked on and make them very functional, right? And then phase three, let's add weight to it. So now if I like do a barbell deadlift instead of just a hinge, can I still lengthen at the bottom position, and then can I Kegel and pull back up as I move into the top of that deadlift? So can I use that even when my muscles are under stress and strain from weight? And then phase four would be power. So now can I do that while I jump? So a depth jump or a box jump, can I still get the lengthening and contraction on the way up and lengthening for that relaxation kind of when I land, so that I'm not landing on a trampoline that is so tight that I get those over flow of those drawing effects. And so that kind of phase approach can be really helpful. But for pubic symphysis pain specifically, the adductors and abductors are huge. And so Copenhagen's, even though for a lot of people, when they try them for the first time, they're like, I'm never going to be able to do this. Yes, yes, we can. We can find a way. And to me, Copenhagen's are one of the easiest ways to kind of like really start to make progress on that. But if you don't have options as a PT, or you don't know how to coach the Copenhagen, then it's easy to be like, that's a really challenging exercise. You can't do that. It hurts too much. We just take it off the plate. And a lot of times I see Copenhagen subbed for something like a yoga block squeeze. Like a yoga block squeeze is great and it's very basic. It's not going to translate to the ability to do a Copenhagen, right? So can I find something that's a little bit more in the middle and make that actually work?
Yeah, and there's so many variations of a Copenhagen plank. Like right now, me cold sitting here, if I were to hop down and try and do a Copenhagen plank, it would be painful still. 9 months postpartum, and that's okay. But I know that there are modifications I can do, and it's something I'm still working on, and it is gradually getting better. So, can attest to that. Okay. What's something that you wish every healthcare provider understood about pelvic health?
My big thing for healthcare providers in general, and this applies to so much more than pelvic health, but I think that we have all done this really, really weird thing where we have a need to be an expert in everything and answer everyone's questions. To me, the best thing that you can do as a healthcare provider is to acknowledge, hey, I don't know much about that. So to me, it's not necessarily teaching healthcare providers across, MD, OB, GYN, like urology. Let me teach you everything about the pelvic floor so that you understand it and know when to refer. My big thing is just like, hey, there's stuff that I can't do as a PT. I can't prescribe medication. I don't know anything about like hormone replacement therapy. Well, I mean, I know like the generals, but you know what I mean. But I know when a patient comes in and asks
Mhm.
about that, I refer, right? I say, like, hey, here's somebody I know. I trust this person. You should go see them. I kind of wish that in PT world we just had that same respect. For some reason, I feel like when it comes to exercises, everyone thinks that they're an expert and that they can find something again on like, YouTube, and here's a handout on some pelvic floor exercises, instead of just connecting them to someone who is an expert in that field. And so for healthcare providers in general, the main goal for me is to like teach it's okay to be like, I don't know. Like, I don't know, but I know someone who does. I think if you don't say I don't know in your practice, then we've really like missed the mark somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, put down your pride because there are specialists in every other field, and there are also pelvic health specialists who you should be referring to if you don't know the answer. 100%, I agree. This isn't a question, but you posted something yesterday, 2 days ago,
Hmm.
and it's a video of you running on Instagram, which, by the way, I love your Instagram,
Thanks.
and it says it says you had leaking with running, then you found my page and realized uphill running could fix it. See caption for details. Without me reading the caption, can you explain this post?
Yeah, so uphill running is like a way underrated tool for postpartum return to running, especially. A lot of my clients have leaking on flat road or downhill. And if you work with runners, you know, runners are not going to stop running. Like they want to keep running. And, you know, giving them cross training options is great, but that's only going to hold them over for so long. So, uphill running, I love. It is harder on your quads, glutes, and hamstrings, which is why people are kind of like, I don't know about that. But it's so much easier on your pelvic floor because it creates that little lean, right? We get into that really stacked posture. We lean forward, the ribs are over the pelvis. And so the body is really able to regulate pressure there a lot better. So, yes, it's harder on a lot of other muscles, but it's easier actually on your pelvic floor to be in that little forward leaned position. The other thing that uphill running does is it usually quickens our cadence a little bit. We can't overstride because the incline will stop us from doing that. So it quickens our cadence a little bit, which helps with pressure management and regulation. It forces us to get in a little bit of a forward lean so the ribs are nicely stacked over the pelvis. And so a lot of my clients who do have leaking on flat road or downhill realize I can run uphill without leaking. And then if we're on a treadmill, super easy, right? We can just take away 1%. So I can tolerate 3 minutes of running at 4% incline, but when I drop to 3% incline, I have leaking. Okay, let's run longer at 4% incline, right? And then as we like start to lower, the pelvic floor can learn on inclines to better regulate pressure. And so again, it's a little less mindful than some of the stuff that we do, which is nice because I don't want you to have to go on your run and think about your pelvic floor. I just want you to go enjoy your run. So find a
Right.
big hill in your neighborhood, work on that. Run the uphills, walk the downhills, do that enough times, and eventually, more than likely, your pelvic floor will get on board.
Yeah. And think about the quad gains.
Yeah. Like there's so many other great things about uphill runs that you're going to get out of that. And then now, not only are you not leaking on flat road or downhill, but it feels like a dream because you're so much more efficient from your hill training.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, are you a race runner? Do you do like marathons, half marathons, that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, like, imagine you encounter a hill during one of those, but you're like, no, never mind. I got this. I've been hill running for like the past 6 months.
If anything, I think by that point you kind of get to where you're like, actually, the hills are kind of nice. Like, I'm good at hills. And that's where, like, I know that I'm really efficient and other people are not. And so, like, I can kind of like snipe these people off up the hill. And maybe in or flat road is not my jam, and that's okay. But like, I know going up that hill, like, I am efficient up the hills because that's all I've worked on to help with pelvic floor work. So it's a win win in so many ways. And it keeps runners running, which is what they want to do.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, you've accomplished a lot over the past, I don't know, decade. You're a mom, you're a physical therapist, a business owner, you have a book coming out. There's a lot of things that you've been doing. You're busy. So if you could go back and talk to yourself and give yourself any wise words or just tell yourself anything back when you first graduated PT school, what would you say?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I think that it would be almost what we kind of were just talking about was like, you don't need to be good at everything. Like, I think there's so much pressure in our generation, especially, I think, is like, I want, you know, we want to achieve and like do all these things. And I have really learned that my energy, if I can focus it into specific areas, I can get so much further than trying to like spread myself over 18 different areas. So while I love orthopedics and I love sports medicine and I love all these things, and I've been able to combine that in pelvic health and orthopedics, I also think that like that new grad version of me kind of needed to hear like, there's still going to be cases where you don't understand what's going on. There's still going to be cases that like are confusing to you and don't go the way that you'd expect them to. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad PT. It just means that it's a complex case. And it's not a failure to say, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why this is not getting better. And because the and is important, I will help you find someone who who can help. So I don't ever discharge patients being like, uh-oh, I don't know what happened. That's weird. It should have been better by now. The next step is let me connect you to someone who I think would be your right person. And I think if I had kind of had that better mindset initially after graduation, to have a little less pride as like I can't fix everything, that would have been helpful in terms of my like emotional energy.
Yes. I like the rule of not discharging anybody with just sort of like a throwing the hands up mentality, like, I don't know, keep trying your exercises at home. If you don't know the right person to refer out to, then find them. Do the research, do your due diligence as a provider so that you're at least doing right by the patient rather than just kind of shrugging and thinking, well, better luck on the next one, you know? So I like that.
And patients aren't upset by that either. Like patients understand like physical therapy can't fix everything. And I think I came out of school really feeling like it could. And so our job is to acknowledge when it's not going the way that I would expect it to. And maybe it's more of a hormone issue, right? Like tendons have estrogen receptors. Maybe we need to get some estrogen on board, which is not my scope of practice. But let me tell you who you could go to next. So, like you said, it is our job if things don't go the way we expect them to, patients are not going to be upset with you for that. If anything, they're going to appreciate it because then they're not wasting time, money, and energy coming into something that's not going the way that it should be. So I think understanding that that's not a failure, in fact, it shows that you're a really incredible clinician, that you're willing to say, I don't know, but I will help you find someone who does.
Okay, before we sign off, talk to us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, that's been a whole thing. So the goal of the book, kind of like we were talking about earlier, was really to be something that like I wished I could have read, not even as a PT, just as an like athlete, like someone who played sports and, wasn't elite, but like, was active and had no understanding about my pelvic floor. And so the goal of the book, we wrote it for the athlete. So we wrote it to be something that's very readable by the general public of you want to understand your body better and, maybe you are planning for a pregnancy postpartum down the line. That's totally fine. That's not what the book's about, but it is something where like, hey, could I tune into this before I get to pregnancy postpartum? So we wrote it for the athlete as something that I felt like I again would have wanted to read in high school, college to be like, "Oh, this is how my body works. I know how my quads work. I know how my biceps work. No one's ever taught me about the pelvic floor." That's how we wrote it. In writing that, there's also a lot of interesting information in there for clinicians and for coaches and for people who want to just be more aware of how to integrate this into their training and their weight room and things like that. So it is a book that is meant to be for the general public, for the general athlete, with a ton of like clinical pearls and like, this is how it works. This is how we tweak it. This is how we, assess it in a performance based setting. So the goal is to really show that the pelvic floor is not just pre postnatal. It's everything that we do in life. And if we can be better about acknowledging that, then hopefully the pre postnatal stuff actually starts to kind of just fall into place because we've been so much better about acknowledging it well before then.
I love it. When does it come out?
It is open for pre-order now. It ships in October. I think it's October 6th. But pre-orders are open now, which I had no idea how this process worked. So if you don't know anything about pre-orders, they're huge. They matter like a ton. So pre-orders basically tell the distributors like Barnes& and Noble, Amazon, how many books should we buy because it shows them if there's interest. And so not just my book, any book that's on pre-order that you're interested in, you should buy it on pre-order because it shows support to those big distributors that end up buying the books. And so if you are ever interested in a book, you should definitely pre-order. You can search it now. It's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, all that kind of stuff. So if you just search for Floret Rachel Selman, it'll pop up. You can pre-order, and then it ships October 6th, I believe.
Floret Rachel Selman. Well, I will be pre-ordering that because I'm a big fan of the pre-order, and I did know that little fun fact. And yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you for taking the time. And yeah, I can't wait to post this. I think a lot of great questions have been answered today.
Thank you for having me.